Hello, this is Betsy George, Chief Financial Officer of the City of Oxnard. I'd like to thank the Finance and Governance Committee, as well as any members of the public who are taking the time to watch this fiscal year 2021-22 mid-year review of our budget. Before we dive into the details of the budget review and our revised estimate of where we think we'll end this fiscal year, I'd like to highlight the recommendation that staff is making tonight to the members of the Finance and the Governance Committee. First of all, you'd be receiving this update on revenue expenditure projections of the major funds and authorize staff to make this presentation to the City Council, incorporating any updates or new information that may arise in the interim. We're also requesting that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend that City Council approve a budget appropriation request in the amount of $1 million in the Public Liability Fund and $162,947 to the Workers' Compensation Fund. An overall budget appropriation of $1,162,947. Additionally, recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution approving amendments to the position control resolution, and that City Council adopt a resolution approving amendments to the classification and salary resolution. And we do have details on each of these requests as we will progress throughout the presentation. The first look at the detailed numbers is our general fund at a summary level. There are more detailed broken out slides to follow. Just to orientate you with a slide, and the next several slides will have the same format, so I won't spend the time on the orientation, but the revenue portion, the inflows of our resources are in the top half, and then expenditures, the outflows of our resources, is in the bottom half. We also have our revised budget, which is the first column of numbers, and that represents the adopted budget that Council adopted in June of 2021. And then it includes any budget adjustments that have occurred between July 1st and October 31st. And those budget adjustments would have been brought to Council and then incorporated into our budget. The next column is our current fiscal year 2021-22 estimates. And these represent the work that we've done in December and January with all of the city departments, as well as the city manager's office, to revise where we think we'll be at the end of the year in regards to revenues, expenditures, and the ending fund balance. The next two columns represent the change in dollar amounts, and these dollars are in millions, and then the percentage change. So you can see here we had our revised budget estimated revenues for the city's general fund was $199 million, and the revised estimates are up by $2.7 million for total estimated revenues of $202 million. The significant changes to our revenue estimates are in sales tax, both Measure E as well as the 1% Bradley-Burns tax. Those two together represent $4.9 million estimated increase in revenue projections, and that's primarily related to much stronger sales occurring in the city than originally projected. We've had two strong quarters in the first half of the fiscal year, so our quarter ending September and the quarter ending in December both were higher than anticipated, so we've increased the estimates for the remainder of the year as well. Additionally, property taxes and deed transfer taxes are expected to be a little bit higher than originally estimated, primarily due to property values, the assessed valuations being higher than in our original projections. These increases are offset by the projected revenue reduction you can see on the last item in the revenue section under other non-tax revenues. And that represents a $4.4 million loss in fees and charges due to the delay in implementing the EMS services. And that $4.4 million is offset by a reduction in expenditures. So as we move down to the expenditure section and see that $17.3 million reduction in expenditures, $5.5 million of that $17.3 million is the decrease in expenditures, which would have been related to the EMS implementation. So had we implemented standalone EMS services, we would have had cost related to that, an estimated $5.5 million, as well as revenues from fees that we would have been able to charge for some of the services provided. Additional components of the expenditures driving that $17.3 million revised estimate, reduction in our revised estimate, is related to personnel savings. That's $4.1 million, and that personnel savings is primarily due to vacancies. So human resources, I know, has been working real hard to fill the positions. We added some new positions due to the increased revenue from Measure E, as well as our ARPA, the COVID relief funds, and the projects that are going to be able to be implemented because of those funds. Some of them involve staff, and we have just not been able to staff as quickly as we had anticipated in the budget, so we have that vacancy savings. And then the last item in that $17.3 million is a $6.8 million in multi-year projects, primarily capital expenditures, that are not going to be expended this year and are projected to be spent in future years. And you can see that $6.8 million towards the bottom of the slide that is being carried over into future years. So those three components are driving the expenditure reduction: vacancy savings, the EMS implementation delay, and the carryover of multi-year projects. This slide provides a little bit more detail on the revenues. Where the previous slide, it was summarized by major groupings. This just shows the detail of all the various categories of revenues in the city's general fund. And so the total, the $199.6 million revised budget, compared to our current estimates of $202.2 million, are the same figures that were viewed on the other slide. And here you can see the property tax, sales tax, those projected increases towards the top of the slide, as well as in the middle of the slide, you see that $4.4 million in the EMS implementation delay that was discussed on the previous slide. And what I hadn't mentioned was the other revenue, the $1.3 million. That increase is related to a one-time receipt in developer fees from the ROSE IFD, and that's or developer agreement, I'm sorry. And so those funds were received already this fiscal year, and so we integrated those into our estimates. And similar to the revenues, this is an expanded view of the expenditures. In the summary slide, we had rolled up some of the administrative functions as well as public works. And this just shows you a little bit more detail by department and division of where those variances are. And again, the bulk of them are related to staffing vacancies. So in community development, police, recreation, etc. Fire, the negative, we talked about the EMS delay, and that's offset by higher than anticipated overtime. Some of that's wildlands fire related. So also in our general fund group is the Measure O fund. And here we have some minor changes to revenue. So initially we had projected $19.3 million in revenue. Now we're projecting $20 million. And the increase is similar to the increase in the general fund. We're just seeing stronger sales in our city, and that is driving up our sales tax collections. And then the expenditures are projected to reduce by about $2.1 million. So from 22 million to 20 million. And that reduction is primarily carrying over of multi-year projects. So projects that we had initially anticipated were going to be spent in 2021-22 fiscal year are now going to be carried over into future fiscal years. And similar to the presentation with the general fund, we see that represented towards the bottom of the slide. We're under our year-end estimates. We have our revenues minus our expenditures, giving us our net annual activity, and the Measure O fund here is nearly a balanced budget. It's slightly deficited, about $100,000, and then we're going to reserve that carryover of those projects at $1.8 million. And so of our starting fund balance from $11.4 million, we have an available ending fund balance, an estimated available ending fund balance for June 30th, 2022 of $9.5 million. And in the water fund, again, the same format of the slide, revenues on the top, expenditures on the bottom, with our revised budget is the first column and our current estimates in the next column. We're estimating revenues for water charges, water usage and fees revenues to decline about 2%, so not a large decline, and that's primarily related to the reduction in rates for the infrastructure use fee. So taking the infrastructure use fee out of our water rates is creating an overall rate reduction, and that's where we see that decline there. And then on the expenditure reduction, that is primarily related to capital expenditures that are going to occur in future years. There are also some savings in operations. So we have less expenditures projected on supplies, services, and chemical purchases. Those are contributing to the lower expenditure estimate, but again, the majority of it is going to be the capital expenditures that are projected to go into future years. And we see that projected carryover of $37 million at the bottom of the slide. We expect to be just above our target reserve level of 25% in the water fund, June 30th, 2022. The wastewater fund is projected to have lower revenue, and that is actually largely driven by the proceeds from a state revolving loan, where we had expected to draw down on that loan this year, and that would have been considered as revenue of those loan proceeds. and those funds would have been available to spend on projects. However, with the work on the projects delayed, we are also delaying the drawdown on that loan. So you see that $21.7 million reduction in revenue, which is actually the loan proceeds. So we won't be incurring any interest costs on that loan until we draw it down, and we won't draw it down until we're ready to do the expenditures. There's also a small decrease in charges and fees also related to the IUF fees being taken out of the rates. For expenditures, again, similar to the water fund and partially related to the not drawing down the loans, is the decrease in expenditures for capital projects. And that's driving largely the decrease in expenditures. There are some savings in operational spending on professional services, supplies, chemicals, etc., but the majority of it is the capital spending. And again, because of those delays, you'll see we do have some carryover for projects. We don't need to carry over the projects that are going to be funded from the loan because we haven't drawn down the loan. And so that those will come together, the revenue and the expenditures, when we are ready to take advantage of that state revolving fund. And we're projected to be well above the 25% target reserve level at the end of this fiscal year. And then the last major fund we're going to cover is the Environmental Resources Fund. And so in this fund, you can see that we have a increase projected in revenue, $53.4 million revised budget compared to our current estimates of $61.1 million. And part of that increase, the $10.2 million you see under other revenue, that is a drawdown on a line of credit that we are using to purchase new refuse trucks. So you may recall that we brought that request to council back in September, I believe, September or October, to initiate that line of credit and draw down those funds for the purchase of those vehicles. And you'll see that corresponding change in the expenditures. So we have a $10.2 million increase in revenue for that loan in other revenue, and then we have a corresponding increase in other operating expenses, the $10.2 million, so those are offsetting. And then we have a similar reduction in fees and charges under the revenues as we did in water and wastewater related to the IUF. And the other changes in expenditures, besides the equipment purchase that I mentioned, driving that $10.2 million, are minor changes related to savings in operational costs, supplies, machinery, waste hauling, etc. And we expect to be right at our target reserve level of 25% at the end of this fiscal year. So just to repeat, the recommendation here tonight is that you receive and file this update and also authorize staff to make this same presentation to City Council. We're also requesting that a budget appropriation for $1 million to the Public Liability Fund, and that is to cover some increased insurance costs as well as a large claim that was settled. And then the Workers' Compensation Fund and budget adjustment for $162,947. And that is, again, to cover some higher insurance costs in the California State Fund. And then we're recommending that City Council adopt the resolution approving amendments to the position control. And you have details of that in the staff report. There are a few positions that are being reclassified. based to better meet the needs of various departments. None of those need a budget adjustment. All of the changes that are being requested, there are sufficient funds in the current budget appropriation that was adopted in June, or any subsequent budget adjustments that have occurred. And then lastly, recommend that City Council adopt a resolution approving amendments to the classification and salary resolution. And so those go hand in hand with the above requests, in that there are no budgetary needs with this request. We are needing to establish an accountant 3 positions, some police corporal positions, and then also to adjust the minimum, the salary for a crossing guard due to the changes in minimum wages. Again, there are details of that in the staff report, and I'm happy to answer any questions during the Finance and Governance Committee meeting. And again, I appreciate your time and thank you for watching this presentation.